Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the McAuley Tucker Show. I'm your host, McAuley Tucker, and today is a very special episode. This will probably be my favorite recording this year. Today we have Mark Walton. Mark Walton is an American story artist and voice actor as well. He's worked on numerous films with many companies, Walt Disney Animation Studios, DreamWorks, Blue Sky, several more. He's also a teacher as well, and he's worked in different positions on multiple different projects. And so today on the show, we're just going to be talking to him, hear his stories, and learn more about what it's like working in this industry and having experience working in this industry. And maybe later on, he can also pass on some information to us, to you guys, the listeners, so you guys can maybe learn and apply some things to your life. First off, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, McAuley. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy life to come onto the show and talk. So yeah, kind of to start off this, you've had a crazy life. Like, you've worked on so many things.
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for sure. It's funny because when I was your age, McCall, I don't mean to, do some ageism here, but I was not doing a professional podcast or networking with people or producing concerts or songs or anything like that. I just had really vague dreams and ideas of what I'd like to do someday. I thought I loved drawing. I think I always loved drawing since I was a little kid. And I thought that maybe someday I would do something with that, although I had really no concrete idea of what. I thought maybe I could be a cartoonist, a newspaper, when there was newspapers, that printed comic strips in them, I thought maybe I could be a book illustrator, as some of my favorite artists, that's what they did. I liked the Muppets. I thought maybe I could get to work for Jim Henson somehow, designing puppets or being a Muppeteer, whether I actually had any talent or not, or doing something with Industrial Light and Magic, they did all the special effects for Star Wars and Indiana Jones and, hundreds of other movies, at the time. And it wasn't until I was getting out of college, in my late 20s, that I got the opportunity. It was a friend of mine who said, "Hey, the Disney Studios is doing an internship and you should apply." And I thought, well, what are the chances that a nobody in the middle of nowhere is going to get a job like that? I'm sure everybody and the dog wants to work for Disney. And I didn't have any training, in animation per se. I just had the vaguest idea of how the movies were made. I loved Disney. I loved animation, but I think astronauts are cool too. That doesn't mean I have any qualifications, to be an astronaut. But what I did is I took a bunch of art assignments that I had done. I had pursued a degree in illustration because that covered a lot of things that I was kind of interested in. And I sent in like pages out of my sketchpads. I did me and my brother, who I was rooming with at the time, and a bunch of illustration friends, had just for fun done it was like a 2 or 3 minute hand-drawn film on 16 millimeter film that we just drawn on paper. None of us knew it. Oh yeah, none of us knew what we were doing. And some of the timing is terrible, and that it turned out at all is kind of a miracle. But I thought, well, this is animation I've done, so I turned that in. And what I didn't know is that the timing was kind of perfect for me because just before I applied for this internship, The Lion King had made like $1 billion worldwide, and Disney, who was only making a movie like every 2 to 3 years, was looking to increase their output to, at least 1, maybe 2 movies a year. They were, just after that, Pixar was going to start making movies in partnership with them. Jeffrey Katzenberg had just left the company to form DreamWorks and had taken a lot of the artists with him. And so there was this desire to like grab people out of college that could draw well enough, they could teach how to animate so that they could, start making many more movies, make and get some of this money, like it had been like The Little Mermaid, and then Beauty and the Beast, and then Aladdin, and then The Lion King, just like made more and more money right after the other. It's like, come on, we need to feed the machine. And so right when I applied, they said, "Oh, okay, good enough. Come on board," and they pulled me into this internship, and I didn't know about storyboarding or animation, and they let us try our hands at like all the different phases of production. And it was just, I mean, I don't want to bore you with every detail of the story, but I got to try my hand at storyboarding right as I was getting done with the internship. There was a tour a tour opportunity. They were doing these mall tours at the time where they would take artists sometimes all over the country, sometimes all over Europe. They just done one, was it Pocahontas? I think they went to Europe and would go to malls or different gathering places around and talk about Disney. They would hype the current movie that was about to come out. They would drop, they would have people that didn't actually always work for Disney, but they could draw the Disney characters competently and answer questions. And so that was me. I was brought in as a backup person. There were two people that they preferred for this job, but they thought, well, Mark's pretty good, and all the other people in his internship, they're more interested in becoming in-betweeners than Hunchback of Notre Dame. Whereas I went out and promoted the film and acted as if I was working on the movie or had worked on movies before, and I do storyboards. And through that, that was just a great experience in and of itself. But through that, I was able to meet Kevin Harkey, who's one of the best story artists in the world. And he took me on after the tour was over as his apprentice in California working on Tarzan. And I was just kind of able to hang on project after project for about 14 years at Disney on different films from there. And lucky me, it was just like one amazing lucky stepping stone kind of appeared in front of my feet after another, and I was, all I had to do was kind of step forward and not extend a whole lot of effort and hang on, and it worked out pretty well for me.
That's crazy. Yeah, that must have been a really awesome opportunity for you, getting this job. And, you mentioned earlier on that, when you were young, you would draw a lot. And I was kind of curious to ask about that. Like, when I was younger, I used to when I would sit on my grandma's backyard and I would have a sign that would say $2, I'll draw you. Did you ever, when you were younger, kind of do something similar to that where you would kind of, in your local area, advertise your work, say, "Hey, I draw, come check it out"?
Well, I would, of course, I was the people around me that saw that I liked to draw, and that's kind of all I wanted to do all the time. I didn't have a lot of friends, and I had no sports ability or coordination at all. I was just happy to sit and draw by myself most of the time. But I'd get asked to do like little flyers or, drawings of their son just for fun, or little things, that were advertising, parties or dances around town. Once in a while, I would try to sell drawings to my parents, I was so crazy about Disneyland. It drove me crazy. We would go like maybe once every 5 years, our family. My dad was a high school teacher, and, so we didn't have a lot of money to fly out to California every time we felt like it in the middle of Utah. And so I was like, I want to go back to Disneyland now, and I've got to save some money. Well, it didn't work out so well, but, and then when I was in high school, I think in and maybe a little bit post high school, I would see these people in malls that were doing caricatures of people. I thought, well, I could do that. I'm pretty good at that. And I would keep calling different malls around town. They'd say, well, we've already got somebody doing that, or, oh, we're not really looking for anybody to do anything like that. And, now, of course, if they were to ask me, I'd say, I'm sorry, I'm just too busy to be bothered. Your petty little peanuts job. No, actually, I wouldn't say that, because I love doing characters, and I still do that whenever I get a chance. Actually, it's a lot of fun. But yeah, it was funny that, it seems like right up through college, I was looking for opportunities. I'd enter contests. Hanna-Barbera had a contest for their fledgling network, the Cartoon Network, where you could draw storyboards. And for a new idea that you had, and I got I think I got second prize actually, which I think they maybe sent me like $50 or something like that. It was better than nothing. And then I had another job that I think I was referred by one of my art teachers to do the cover of a travel guide for the state of Utah. And I must have spent like a month on it, putting all these different references to all the different things in the state of Utah, putting little jokes and things in. And they paid me $700, which, I think from their point of view was, oh, we're doing a big favor, giving all this money to a nameless artist that has no experience and no credentials to speak of. But they, for me, it's like, dude, I spent, that's like a week's pay, for the kind of work that I'm doing. And I spent all this time, and they got to have all the rights to, reprinting. They made posters out of it. They made a jigsaw puzzle out of it, all these things. So who knows however much money they got for their petty $700. So I felt kind of a little abused, to be honest, and it's just like, but hey, we'll maybe, we'll maybe give you some other jobs to do travel pamphlets for other states in the Midwest, and it was shortly after that I got my job. I should say I got the internship at Disney, and then I thought, yeah, well, so long, suckers. I'll never have to deal with the likes of you again. Well, maybe I did, but at the time it felt like a real victory. So yeah, I mean, I guess the message there is, don't give up necessarily right away. Anyway. Hang in there, don't, even if things don't work out for you immediately, that doesn't mean you should, it's never going to work out for you. Being tenacious, is important, and timing. I'm sure other people have told you, being in the right place at the right time is almost everything, and so as long as you're prepared for it, you're doing everything you can to learn and to get better and be ready to do what you want to do. And then, hopefully, chances are things will work out. I knew people who made it into the internship with me who had actually tried to get into Disney like 7 times. I remember one person actually applied 7 different times. And, it might have been something where people would say, okay, give up. We've already told you the answer. But the thing I think that made the difference with them is they asked for notes. They asked what they could do better. And they addressed those notes, and they did things differently. And they made it clear that they were serious about it, and that they listened, and applied whatever feedback that they got, so that by the time, they applied that 7th time, they were 7 times better, and it was the right time, and there was space for them, and so they were brought in. So yeah,
that's really great to hear this story. When you were younger, you of course drew. Was there any characters that you personally designed? Growing, even when you were younger, or even when you were older. Have you ever designed any characters that you've kind of kept, in a box over here that you...
It's funny that you should ask that. When I was, I'm going to say I was like maybe 7 or 8 or so, I designed some little monster character with one eye and kind of webbed fingers and toes like a frog. I can't remember if I was doing like a little story about Halloween, or if I was writing a happy Halloween card to somebody. I love Halloween. I've just always been obsessed with Halloween stuff and ghost stories and that other, all things Halloween. And when my brother and I were of college age, we became aware when we were both up at Utah State at the same time that the this guy that was doing a cartoon strip for the school newspaper was retire. I can't remember if he was retiring, he was graduating, both, and so there was going to be an opening. And I said, Paul, we need to make a comic strip. We will be professionals. People will see our hundreds of students from around the world will see our drawings. We'll be famous, And so we did. We said, okay, what do we do? What do we do? And I dug out my little character, which I'd kind of refined and polished a little bit, and I'd enjoyed drawing him. I gave him these kind of big clumpy feet that kind of looked like shoes, and these kind of long skinny fingers. It was kind of like an alien version of Mickey Mouse. I think I was trying to draw him, and then he had this character that he'd come up with it was a junior high or high school, Bingo the surf dog, who wore plaid shorts and played hacky sack, and kind of had this cool zigzaggy pattern on his ears and his arms and legs. And we thought, well, let's just do a strip with these two characters. What do we do? Well, we're in college. Let's do a strip about being in college. We're doing it right now. And the funny thing is, I think at the time they wanted 6 or 8 strips done so that they could see that we could do it, but also that they had enough that they could run with and give us time to make more strips. And we were worried, could we come up with 6 different jokes? And the great thing was that being in college was such fertile ground for comedy and storytelling that in the end, we just wrote down, we filled up the front and the back of a page just of ideas for strips, that we could do. And then we just picked the first 6 ideas that we thought would kind of go together and submitted. And we got in, and we got to do the strip. So that was kind of fun, that's something that could have been, who knows? If I probably would have really tried, I probably could have come up with a better character to put into the strip, but it seemed to work well enough for what it was. I thought, if anything, Paul's character, the dog, was more sophisticated design and everything. But yeah, we had a lot of fun just kind of putting those characters and having them relive some of our adventures with getting financial aid and dealing with teachers or difficult roommates or student housing or jobs, that you work while you're in college to pay the bills, whatnot. So the answer, that's a very long way to say yes. Yes, I did.
That's great. You mentioned a lot of stories come from college, and I was curious, is there any funny stories or a funny story that you can tell in your experience at college?
Oh, I could tell stories for hours. I could run out this podcast with stories. I'm trying to think if there's a really a best one. There was one story where I'm trying to remember all the details. It got kind of complicated, where my brother, a lot of stories dealing with dates gone wrong. Not every date went wrong, but the memorable ones, the funniest ones, I think, are where things didn't go as planned. Where my brother was on a double date, and the girl seemed nice enough that he was paired with. And then at some point, there's a phone call to, and this is before people had cell phones, so it was just they were at I think it was 2 roommates that were, the 2 girls that doubled up, and Paul's date gets a call, and it's from, it turns, and the girl is really flustered while she's talking to this guy, and she says, "Oh my gosh, this guy is coming here." And Paul's like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, and the other girl said, "Oh, it's her fiance." It's like, "Her what?" Oh my gosh, I told him I'm not interested, and I broke up with him, and he won't listen to me. He won't take me seriously. And so, he says he wants to come over and try to tell me why we need to get married. So I told him that I'm engaged to you now, so he would back off, but he that didn't dissuade him, and he's coming over here right now. He's really angry. Paul's like, what? And then And he's there. It's like, Missy, open up. I can hear you with the, you'd better let me in there or I'm going to get really mad. I'm going to start hurting people, And she said, well, we better let him. Paul's like, no, don't let him in. And he's banging on the door. And, they let him in against all logic and judgments. And the guy's like, I don't understand what's going on, And Paul's like, look, I'm not engaged. I've never met this girl before. I barely know her, And they have this long, drawn out, stupid, breakup right there on the day while Paul's just trying to pretend he's not there, experiencing all of this, And so he survived, didn't get beat up or shot or anything like that. But yeah, it was more than a little crazy. And so I think we got like 5 or 6 strips out of that story. It was great, And I think we maybe had the weird girlfriend come back, and I kind of combined her with another, difficult dating experience I'd had with somebody who was really clingy and, who didn't understand that I wasn't as interested in them as they were in me, and I kind of made it look like them. We tried very hard to not base anybody too closely on somebody that might, especially if they were like students at the school, so they might read it and say, hey, is that supposed to be me? Well, I should say we got better at it. The first time we had a roommate that both of us shared, and we basically just took stuff that he said and did and put it right into the strip. And then later said, hey, is this me? And we're like, no, that's totally not. Yeah, it totally was. So that was stupid, We should have been way. So yeah, after that we're like, okay, we can do stuff, but we have to move stuff around. And because I actually had a girl, the same girl said, this kind of reminds me of me. It's like, no. And I could truthfully tell, it's like all the details from my brother's experience, failing to say, yeah, but we also made it look like you when I took these other things from you, So, there's nothing like mining comedy and laughs from other people's tragedies and personal failings, right?
Yeah, I love hearing stories. That's why I always enjoy asking those questions. Just kind of to hear these stories. And moving on. So you went to Disney and you had this job. Like, what was going through your mind when they accepted you? Were you surprised? Were you confused?
Oh, I was shocked. I was completely shocked. I mean, I was thrilled, but then I guess my next thought is, oh my gosh, am I good? I'm not good enough for this, and that was actually, I dealt with for something, for a long time, what I guess they call impostor syndrome. It's like, oh, they've made a mistake. They've thought that I can do these things that I can't. They've accidentally accepted me instead of this other person who really has the qualifications. I'm at any minute now, they're going to realize their mistake and I'll be out on my ear. And so I felt like for a lot of the time that I was there, I felt like I had to work harder and later hours. And I really, for a lot of the time that I was at Disney, especially, I just, that was my number one, if any, only relationship going on. I was there day and night, sometimes weekends, and just trying to soak up everything I could and look at other people's work and try to get better. But it was just amazing too. I remember the first day that they toured us around the Disney studios. We did the internship in Florida, and so we actually had somebody take us around Disney World and get us to the front of the line on the rides, talk about that. And when I did, that was cool. And then going and meeting people, animators that I knew about who had, animated some of my favorite characters, and shaking their hand and telling them how awesome they were and seeing artwork for movies that were going to come out in a few years, and then we got to do the whole thing all over again in California when I started as a job, as a story artist there, and getting to go to the animation research library and realize we could go and whenever we had time, of course, but anytime we could go, we could see the maquettes that were sculpted for the different movies. We could see original backgrounds for Snow White all the way forward, to the movies that they were working on at the time. We could flip through a scene that had been drawn by Milt Kahl or Glenn Keane, or Mark Kent. I mean, it really was. I just kind of had to pinch myself, like, I'm getting paid to be here. I would pay so much to be here. This is my job. How many people would love to be doing? I'm not worthy. And, after going through college and feeling like I spent a fortune on art supplies, oil paints and graphene and pastels and acrylics and horsehair brushes and whatnot, and carrying big portfolios and fishing tackle boxes full of art supplies around to go. They had an art supplies office where I could go down and I could order anything and they would give it to me. I ordered one of those gigantic 300 marker sets that I drooled over when I was a high schooler, and it was mine. It was mine. And I just got things that I didn't even need, that I didn't know I would ever use, because I could, That was about the same time that I discovered eBay and found out that all the handful of products that were released when The Nightmare Before Christmas came out, when I was still in college, that you could have them all for 10 times their original price on eBay if you were willing to spend all your spare time bidding on things. And so I spent all the money I was making on, Nightmare Before Christmas dolls and party favors and pillows and other garbage, that I just, because I thought, wow, this is so, basically it's like me being a kid and having, feeding my inner 14-year-old with all the money I had then, and eventually I realized, maybe I should save some money in case of a rainy day, but it took a while.
Oh yeah, I definitely get that. It's really interesting to hear, like, the whole hiring process, how you got there and what they'd given you. I've only worked at 2 places. I used to work at McDonald's and for like a year and 6 months. And so, it's definitely it's interesting to hear the hiring process just, for Disney. And, they would do all this different stuff. You said your first project that you worked on, you mentioned before, was Tarzan, correct? Was that your first Disney project?
Yeah. I mean, I was promoting Hunchback, but I didn't do anything on the movie. Although I still got to go to the wrap party after. I was just like one of a handful of people from the tour that got invited to be at the wrap party, which was pretty cool. But the first movie that I actually contributed anything to was Tarzan. And that was another really lucky stroke of luck, because I came on and the reason I got the job was that the Kevin Harkey, my mentor, was the co-head of story at the time, and he wanted help, getting his sequences done along with all the meetings that he had to go to, and then extra where he was like working over other people's scenes and doing extra drawings and whatnot. Being a head of story is a lot of work, and so he thought, well, hey, this guy can draw well enough. I can kind of have him work close enough to my style. And my first job on that show was Glenn Keane, who was at the time, he was going back and forth between France and California. He was leading a team of animators in France to animate the main character Tarzan there. It's amazing people over there. And he had, they were still kind of struggling with the story and figuring things out. And he had an idea for this big tentpole scene, we call it in the business, a sequence that's kind of in the middle of the movie where maybe people's interest is kind of sagging. As you have a big action sequence to wake them up and, get them interested in what's going on again. And it was a scene where Tarzan and Jane are running away from a troop of baboons, and he's swinging through the vines and surfing on the branches. That was all his idea. To make Tarzan surf like kids that he knew skateboarded, and and he came up with this idea that he'd just done like on little post-it notes, a couple of inches, if that big, where he goes into this maze of vines that kind of turns into a roller coaster almost, where he's turning upside down and doing corkscrews, and then he's doing hand over hands loops like a jungle gym. And my mentor, Kevin Harkey, said, look, why don't you take a crack at this? I'm super busy doing other things. And so I worked on that for, I don't know, a couple of weeks. And then Kevin came through and said, look, okay, just do this. You're being way too complicated and messy here, to simplify this part. This part you did over here is okay, but do it this way, simplify this, change this, and it got in the movie. And what a lot of what I did was basically taking sequences that other storyboard artists had been working on and trying things for years in some cases, and they were running out of time and they needed to wrap it up and put something into the movie. So I'd say, here, do this. And in some cases they would tell me how to change the drawings. In some cases they said, we don't know what bit of business to do here, so do that. And so there are big swaths of the movie where I'm the credited artist that worked on that scene, even though many other people worked to get it to that point. You know what I mean? Sometimes I'm even just taking somebody's rough and redrawing it a little bit more cleanly in my style. So like if you look at the art of book, there's an obscene number of drawings of mine in the book, much outsized to my actual contributions, but I thought it was great. It just made me seem so important and essential to the film. And I like to think that I learned a lot. It was cool because I got to learn to work with a lot of different artists on the movie and see how they drew and, how they solved problems and things like that.
Sitting through Tarzan, what was going through your mind? You're able to kind of see the fruits of your labor, just to see like everybody's like what they put together. Was this a great opportunity for you? Like just kind of sitting here, and did you enjoy it?
Dude, it was awesome. Again, because I kind of came on to the tail end of the movie, like in the last, year or so of development. It was neat because especially like in the case of, the first assignment I did with, the baboon chase through the jungle. It was I think it was just within a couple of months of finishing that we would go to the little in-studio movie theater and see dailies. I think they still do that. I'm guessing they still do that at Disney, and you'd see, the very rough drawing. First you'd see the story reel, and then you'd see the rough animation. And then, they would have, because they were doing CGI branches and vines, sometimes they'd have these little CGI blobs that looked like milk duds that were supposed to represent the baboons hopping up and down chasing Jane. And so like in a relatively short amount of time for this business, I got to see what I'd done end up on the screen. That was really cool. That's unusual, for this business. It's what came to happen the longer I'd been there is, I'd work on a project for several months or a year or 2 or 3, and then I'd move on to something else, and it might not be until years later that whatever I did, that I'd see that incorporated into the film, or I just wouldn't have. I'd be too busy on the film I was working on. I wouldn't follow any of the dailies, and then I'd just see the finished film, and I'd already been working on 1 or 2 other things by that time. The most, I think, the first most exciting thing, it was all pretty exciting. I've seen my name on the end credits of Tarzan at the very end was really cool. I would say, look, there's my name. I did it. The other thing that was really a very exciting kind of pinch me in my awake moment was one of the next projects that I worked on, Home on the Range. I was, a lot of the story people that were working on that film were doing, we wrote a lot of the sequences, that were done at the time. And I could tell you a whole long story about that. But as a result, we were asked to do a lot of scratch voices. In other words, the temporary voices that are in this when they take the storyboards and make them into a reel, to kind of, they're adding just people around the studio to do the voices. They're taking temporary music and sound effects, and then showing it on, on film to make you, to make you understand better what it's going to be like when it's animated, and so they can decide whether it's working or not and whether they need to make changes. And I was lucky enough, and actually another guy who worked on the film, were both of us were lucky enough that they decided to keep our voices in the film. I was these two love-struck longhorn steers that were trying to make time with the cows, who were the main characters, and he got to do the Willie brothers, who were these characters that he kind of developed, and he wrote a lot of the dialogue for. And the first time that I went onto a shared computer and saw the scene that I had storyboarded and done the voices for, and I'm seeing, one of the greatest animators in the country, if not the world, has animated to my voice. I mean, that was just surreal. And I remember my brother was visiting me at the studio. It's like, let's see this. Let's see this. I haven't seen this yet. I'm like, what? My voice is coming out of a Disney character's mouth. And we just play it over and over and over again. I just couldn't believe it. I just, that was an incredible moment.
Yeah, I was watching that scene actually today. I was.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was like, because I was in the research. I'm like, he did a voice in Home on the. I'm like, I want to listen to that, and so I was listening to him. Like, it sounds like Mark, but it also sounds not like Mark at the same time. It's like.
Well, I hope it didn't sound too much like me. I mean, both because I'd like to think I'm a better actor than that, but also I hope I don't sound like this lecherous, creep that's like, hey, maybe we can help each other.
Yeah, no, I was pretty impressed at your, like, the how you can change your voice so well. I'm like, that's crazy, because not everybody can do that.
Well, that's kind of you to say. I think I admired people as a young age who were, who could do vocal impressions, and I guess I put some time into trying to do that, practice. There were like little, I could do a lot of the Muppets voices, okay, or some, I could do a pretty passable Darth Vader impression and a few different people like Ronald Reagan, and I think that. I liked acting. I took some acting classes, and I was in a few plays in high school and college. I liked the idea of becoming somebody else and performing. And I think that served me well as a story artist, because I think when you do have, even if you don't have the opportunity to write the script or the dialogue, I think when you're doing the emoting, and the drawings, and you're thinking about, how their body language and their facial expressions or whatever. I think if the more you could put yourself into the mind of the character, the more honest and believable your acting choices are going to be. Hopefully the more interesting they're going to be too. And especially in the old days where we had to get up in front of a big corkboard with all of our drawings pinned up and talk about everything that was happening. We're doing all the dialogue and the sound effects, if any, and singing if there's music. If you like acting and you're comfortable, performing a little bit, then I think it's all to the better. And I did like kind of adjusting my voice to be whatever character that I was trying to be like. And so yeah, that's kind of how I got to do the scratch voices for a few different movies. I did a lot of scratch that didn't end up in the movie, which was fine. I still really enjoyed doing it, but yeah, the few times where it did work out that way was pretty cool for me.
Right. I'm not sure if this was your second voice work. I'm not sure if there's anything in between. Chicken Little, Goosey Lucy.
That was my second job. Yeah. I mean, I think I probably had done some scratch for no. Sorry, I probably went straight to that. I had done some scratch for a movie that never got made before Home on the Range. That's you could do a whole other podcast about wildlife. That's a story and a half. But right from Home on the Range, I think I went on to working on Chicken Little, and shortly after I started storyboarding, they asked me if I wanted to do the. Basically, I wasn't really the credited voice at the time. It was Katie Finneran, who has done some TV work. I don't know her as well as I should, but she had a lot more dialogue, and I was just going to do the sounds when she became a berserker, rage-fueled fighting machine. Like it seems like Fox Luxy would snap her fingers and make her go crazy. And so I was just doing crazy animal noises mixed with kung fu sounds and what have you, but they ended up cutting more and more of her dialogue down, and so in the end, I think Katie did a noise for her, something like that, and that was the only part so I became the default voice of the character, which was kind of crazy.
Right. And you mentioned wildlife, and when I was looking into your portfolio, I misread it as The Wild, which I thought it was referring to the 2006 Disney animated movie The Wild. But I'm like, oh wait, no, it's wildlife. That's why. I was like, oh yeah.
That's an understandable mistake. I think another movie ended up coming out also called Wildlife, and I don't remember who made it exactly. But yeah, your confusion is understandable. That's a whole other story about how Disney was trying to take these small studios and kind of say, well, we don't need Pixar. We'll make our own movies with CGI on the cheap without Pixar. They'll be great. They'll be very successful. And they weren't. Total disaster. It was interesting. They actually had the opportunity to buy. I can't remember if they were just going to get the distribution rights for Ice Age, or if they were actually offered the chance to buy the studio. And at the time they said, no, we can do better than this movie. Ice Age, what is this? This looks so unprofessional. We can do better than that. Four sequels and billions of dollars later, I think people looked at the head of the studio at the time and said, you're an idiot. What were you thinking? We could have had all that money by now. And then of course in the end they ended up buying the studio out anyway, and now they own all the rights to all the characters. So I guess it all worked out. Didn't really help that executive that made those choices at the beginning, but I guess.
I was curious to ask, because I was like, I also know that you did Goosey Lucy in the video game as well. I'm not sure if they reused some of the old clips.
I think I could be wrong. I don't have the best memory, but I think they just reused stuff from the movie to be in the. I mean, they might have had me do one or two noises. I think I gave them enough coverage, and it was non-specific enough, that they could just plunk it in there. I did have to do a lot more for Rhino.
Oh yeah.
There were like days of extra dialogue and grunts and screams and groans and laughs and titters and whatnot, that I had to do for that. But I was well compensated for it. So it was all good. And it was a lot of fun.
Right. I know listening through the video game, I could hear a lot of your voice a lot more than in the movie. I was I was kind of curious.
I was slipping, huh?
Yeah, no. I was curious how
it wore me down.
How were you able to make that voice? And I was also going to ask with that, Goosey Lucy, I was watching the movie as well. Goosey Lucy doesn't really say a lot, or doesn't even actually say anything like words and sentences. And I was going to ask you, like, what do you think Goosey Lucy would sound like if Goosey Lucy was able to speak?
I'm not even sure. I honestly have a really difficult time imagining Goosey Lucy speaking. She just seems like this kind of primal rage monster to me. I'm not sure she has coherent thoughts that she would express or would want to express. I don't know. You got to give me some time to think about that one, man. That's kind of blowing my mind right now. Goosey Lucy talks. I don't know. I think it'd be a little kind of along the lines of kill, destroy, die, kill, ruin, maim, tear, burn. Now I'm kind of sounding like Rhino.
I know.
Maybe I'm just playing the same character over and over again, with just a slightly different voice. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you were asking how I did Rhino. Well, it's funny. I have tremendous respect for some of the really great voice actors in this business who can sound like anybody. They can imitate almost any celebrity or public figure, living or dead, that you've ever heard of, if they know what they sound like. And men and women, children, old people. A lot of them can sing, and on top of all that, they're fantastic actors. For me, in spite of my amateurish attempts at imitation, I think if I'm good at anything, it's maybe getting inside the mind of a character and imagining how they feel and what they think. And I think that's like I said, I think that's I'm good enough at that to do a pretty good job at storyboarding that kind of stuff. When I was asked to do Rhino, it's funny, I tried a few different what I thought were like what a hamster would sound like, and right away they said, no, don't try to do a voice, just be yourself. We're having you do it because we think you're funny. Like your voice, the way it is already funny enough. Just worry about the acting part of it. Don't worry about changing your voice to sound like whatever you think Rhino is, which made it a lot easier, of course, for me. I think part of it was also the idea that, well, we don't need to make him do anything too difficult because this is all going to be replaced by a professional actor and or comedian anyway. This is all just for us at the studio here to get a giggle out of the people who know Mark. So yeah, I mean, basically the hardest thing for me doing Rhino, and they did a lot. A lot of times the director would come into the recording booth with me and talk through the scene. Sometimes they'd actually even bring in the storyboards or a few of them to see what Rhino was doing and what his facial expressions, kind of what they were hoping for, so I could kind of get into character better. Sometimes the director would read Bolt's lines back to me, so it would become more conversational. The one of the hardest things for any voice actor, at least in this country, is that typically all of our lines are recorded in isolation. We're not, there's a few movies, but not very many American movies where two actors will actually record with one another. But usually it's all each actor just records all the lines that they have in the movie at that time by themselves, lots of different ways, quiet, soft, sad, angry, fast, slow, what have you, emphasizing different parts of the sentence or whatever. And from there, and part of that, I mean, a lot of it is that, not every actor is going to be available at the same time. They'll come up with ideas that may only change one of the character's lines of dialogue. Different actors live in different parts of the country. John Travolta, I think, was living in Florida at the time that we were doing Bolt. Dame Judi Dench is in Britain, and her lines were recorded there at a studio remotely, I think, when she was doing The Cow and The Home on the Range. And so it's just the editor and the director or directors, sometimes the head of story, who have a very clear idea of how it's all going to work together as they're recording each separate person. And so they can kind of get enough coverage from everybody and then mix them together. And sometimes it's a matter of, I know with me, there were times where they took the beginning of one take that I had done and the end of another take to create the perfect performance that didn't actually exist. And, but they do it so seamlessly, you can't tell. And it really sounds like everybody's really in the room talking to each other at the same time. It sounds much more spontaneous and natural than the circumstances would allow for. TV is a different animal where they often have the entire cast recording everything together, and sometimes, a lot of times, the storyboards actually they're drawing the storyboards to those vocal performances that are already recorded. It's a very accelerated time schedule. They're like, okay, write the script this week. Okay, record the script in 3 days. Okay, here's story artists. You're going to draw this, and you've got to do everything really clearly and precisely because this is going to be shipped straight to Taiwan, where they're going to start animating it. And It'll be used as the layout stage or whatever. So yeah, we have the luxury in feature animation usually of doing a lot of trial and error, before we arrive at the final product. Less so if they make big changes towards the end of the process, which seems to be more of the norm at a lot of the big studios these days. But still, they try, they try to exhaust their options before committing to anything, and make sure that they try to make sure that that's what they want to do if they can do it. So I mean that's a little difficult by itself. But the other difficult thing for me was just honestly enunciating clearly, speaking a little bit more quickly than I normally would. A lot of times they'd say, "That was great. Can you do it twice as fast as that?" and a little more loudly, and don't breathe heavily into the microphone. So I like to think that Rhino was basically me, just a little bit more articulate and maybe a little bit more excited and high energy than I am on a given day. Whereas Rhino is like kind of super hyper all the time. But yeah, I mean, I think that his headspace or what he's doing or thinking about probably does stuff to my voice that I'm not even aware of. I might be speaking a little bit at a higher pitch just because I'm excited, in a lot of the lines. But yeah, I'm not going out of my way to change my voice. I'm just trying to think of, well, how does Rhino feel and how would he say these things, I guess, more than anything.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier how a lot of the times people aren't in the studio together doing, the recordings. And I was listening to a Disney interview a while ago. I actually was always wondering about if you ever met your co-stars, and I actually answered the question in there. But I thought it'd be kind of cool to talk about that. It was an interview you were talking about your experience working on Bolt on this Disney podcast, with Disney stuff, and you mentioned how you actually you didn't actually meet them a lot, and I wanted to kind of hear about that. You talked a lot about when you interact with Miley Cyrus, but John Travolta.
Oh, did I tell you? Yeah.
Yeah, with John Travolta, what was that about? I don't know where that was.
Dude, I think I said hi to John Travolta and he nodded at me, and that was about it.
Really?
As far as the interaction I had. I shared a stage with him the day of the premiere, when they had before the movie actually was released to theaters, when they had the premiere that all the stars and the directors and everybody came to with their friends, and where John Lasseter started telling the story of how I was cast. And John, it's funny because John Travolta said, "Oh yeah, I heard about this. How you got the voice. Tell this story, And he seemed genuinely interested and smiling about it, And they told the story, and he was smiling and laughing. But after that, it's like, yeah, I bumped into him, and I don't know. I'm sure he was incredibly preoccupied.
Oh yeah,
a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, he was not going out of his way to say, "Hey, it's a pleasure to meet you." Great. I mean, yeah. maybe he thought he'd given me high enough praise there on stage already, but it's fine.
Yeah, and there was no pictures. I couldn't find any pictures of you with the others. That's the thing. No. Yeah, there's
no. I will say I heard that Miley Cyrus did have her publicist snap a cell phone photo. I saw it, but maybe it's floating around on the internet somewhere. And I did. I was in a room with Susie Essman, the voice of Mittens, the cat, for an hour. We were signing posters for different charities and causes. And then I did a tour with her for a couple of days in Toronto. I think it was Toronto. It was either Toronto or Ontario. I want to say it was Toronto. I could be wrong. Where we did some radio interviews and some newspaper interviews. She is really nice. She seemed like a really cool person, and I felt bad because I didn't really know who she was. I heard she kind of said, "Yeah, I'm Susie Essman." I met her. It's like, "Oh, who are you?" And it's like, I'm your co-star, Susie Essman. I was on Curb Your Enthusiasm for several seasons on HBO. I was like, "Oh, right." I'd never watched Curb Your Enthusiasm, but I know Larry David and these other people who were famous for for being on it, and she's a great, obviously a great actress. She, if anybody else, I'll tell you, it's a real testament to both her and John Travolta that you like Bolt and Mittens as much as you do, and that you're rooting for them and care about them, because they are very difficult characters to like. They do and say things that are really unpleasant and abrasive. Bolt is terrible to Mittens, and he's completely delusional. It doesn't really know what's going on, and he acts as if he does, which could be really obnoxious. And then Mittens, of course, is just really angry and bitter and mean and cynical, because she's had a terrible life, and so the fact that you like and care about those characters and are willing to see them come around and have this tremendous growth, those are real actors. Whatever else you want to say about them, I think they earned their paychecks on that movie. All I had to do was be silly and crazy and goofy, which is pretty easy, especially with the way the character's written and animated to look even funnier.
Yeah, listening to that podcast as well, I think what was really funny was hearing your interaction with, I believe it was Malcolm McDowell.
Yes. Did I tell about that? Yes.
That was hilarious. That must have been so much
Yeah, I was going to say, basically, Malcolm and Susie Essman were the actors on that show that I had the most meaningful interactions with, and then I got a lot of mileage out of that story. But do you want me to tell the
story?
Sure. Well, so basically it's this huge deal to have been invited to the premiere anyway, and I get to rent out this stretch Humvee limo, and I get a lot of all of my family from Salt Lake, Utah to come and ride in the limo, and a couple of friends that kind of begged their way into the limo in Los Angeles with me. When we go on the red carpet, and my girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife, and people are, snapping pictures of us and asking us questions as if we're really important. And then we get into the El Capitan Theater, which is, this really old movie palace in Los Angeles, where they've gone out of their way to restore it to its former glory. And, they have the people in the red, gold buttoned outfits with the little pillbox hats that are, offering you popcorn and drinks. And my mom thinks this is so cool. And as we're going to the theater, where my mom's going to make such a big deal about the Wurlitzer organ that's going to rise out of the floor, and somebody's going to play, a medley of Disney classics, and people are going to come on stage and dance in the Disneyland character costumes. But before we can go in, this guy says, "Excuse me, Mr. Walton, Mr. McDowell would like to have a word with you." I went, okay, and my family's like, "Well, we're going into the theater. We know." It's like, "Well, this is important, I don't know. What does he want with me? Is he angry with me?" It seemed very serious, and so he kind of pulls me aside, and Malcolm McDowell comes to me and says, "You bastard, you bloody bastard, look at you, you're not even a professional actor, and you bloody stole the show away from all of us, you blooming bastard, you really did it, didn't you?" And I'm going, I'm being cursed at by Malcolm McDowell, Clockwork Orange, Hero, a million projects in between all those, and I thought, if I get run over tomorrow, it's okay. I can say, this happened to me, and I hope I'll have to write it down in my journal before something happens to me, so people know how meaningful my life has just barely become. It's like that Rhino line basically says, it's just that every moment spent in your presence is the new most important moment of my life. Probably getting it wrong, but I've got the essence there, hopefully. But they're really, that was pretty cool. That was pretty memorable, I have to say.
Yeah, I love that story. And I was also curious, with all your other projects, did you meet, even if you were just doing the storyboard art and the visual development, did you ever have the opportunity to meet any other actors in the projects you've worked with?
A few. I'm sorry to say, most of the time what happened is I missed opportunities, because there were several times when I'd be talking with the security guards or the receptionist in the lobby of the Disney studio, and somebody would be right next to me and having some conversation with somebody there, and they'd leave, and then somebody would say, that was Tia Carrera, right? I was like, what? No, that was her, because she was doing stuff for Lilo and Stitch, the older sister, Nani, I think. Or they'd say, or I remember there was a time at Disneyland with a friend, and we were on the Indiana Jones ride, and somebody said, Jennifer Garner, and they got on their phone and said, oh my gosh, Jennifer Garner was sitting right next to us. She was driving the vehicle. I was like, she was? What? I don't expect. I guess I should have expected to see famous people and been on the lookout for them, or I don't know. They didn't look enough like I expect. I don't know. But yeah, that happened over and over again. Somebody would say, you know who that was, right? And I was like, no, who was it? It's like, dang it, I could have. There was one time I went to a Gorillaz concert at a theater in downtown LA, and I just kind of went there on a lark. I felt like I read it in the newspaper that day. It's like, oh, I probably won't even get a ticket, but why not? I have nothing better to do. And then I was like, somebody scalped a ticket, and I was able to get in for even less than I think it was supposed to be. And it was a weird thing. I don't know if you know who the Gorillaz are. It's kind of this, for your listeners who may not know who they are, it's kind of, if you know about Cal Arts, where you have musicians and animators and actors all going to school at the same time, it'd be like a dream project for classmates. They would all get together and create a band out of nothing. Well, not out of nothing, but they got professional singers and rappers and musicians, and then they got the designer to design the characters. You got Robert Valley, who also did some design work and animation for it. And they fabricate this band, out of all these desperate elements. But for the performance, they basically had a curtain around this stage in the middle of this auditorium, and then a little video screen that they were playing the videos while the band, we could see them silhouetted with some colored lights behind this curtain, but just their shadows, and people just sat there and stood, and I was like, this is terrible, it was such a lousy presentation. And then later they went on to do things where they'd have like holograms of CGI holograms of the characters, or even puppets of the characters that would perform live on stage. But this time, this is the best they could do, I guess. At least in this venue. And I also thought it was crummy that nobody was dancing, because it was great music, so I'm going to dance if nobody else dances. And before I knew it, this huge circle had cleared around me, because apparently I was the only person interested in dancing. And by the end of it, like the people I actually met some friends there by happenstance, and they had put a lot of distance between themselves and me because I was being so crazy. And by the end of it, this woman comes up and says, oh my gosh, you're a dancing god. You're amazing. How do you do it? Can I take lessons? Where will I see you again? It's like, I don't know. It's like, I just want to tell you, I worship you. I love you. And there's this guy that's on her arm that does not look happy at all, that I'm getting all this attention. And so she walks off with this guy, and I turn to my friends who have kind of worked their way back to me, and I said, hey, that kind of looked like Rosanna Arquette. And the guy goes, dude, that was Patricia Arquette. And she called you a dancing god. And I said, I could have gotten her number. I could have done something, man. She was gorgeous. So talented and everything. Well, it turned out that she got, I think it was 5 days later, she got engaged with the guy that she was with. So maybe it's just as well that I didn't complicate things like I could, but it's a nice thought. But yeah, there was a lot of missed opportunities like that because I just wasn't paying attention, or I didn't recognize people. I'm trying to think of the people. I mean, Miley Cyrus is probably the one that most other people would get excited about, because she's still kind of a big deal, and certainly was at the time. And she was very nice to me, I have to say. It meant a lot to me that I ran into Weird Al Yankovic.
Let's go! Weird Al is the best.
Very, very briefly. I just have loved Weird Al since I was 14, 15, and by the time I finally got to see him live in concert when I was living in Los Angeles, I thought I could, I didn't think I could worship him anymore. And he puts on the best show.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
we went to a concert one time too, before pandemic. It was
yeah. Did you?
Oh,
lucky you. Lucky you. And did he do all the costume changes and sets?
Yes. It was the orchestra. It was the orchestra one that he was doing the tour. It was the best.
You really saw all the bells and whistles. Just he loves his fans. He treats them so well. But he was there because he was auditioning. I don't know if he was auditioning or if they were seriously courting him to do dialogue for the robot and Meet the Robinsons, and they ended up going with Harlan Wilson. I can't remember his. He was fine. He was very good. Honestly, I think Weird Al would have probably made a better Rhino than I would have. It's a very similar take that I think he's done in some of his characters before. But yeah, he took the time, and I just told him how awesome he was and how sorry, like his parents had died in a fire just very recently, or seemed like it was very recently. And, and he was saying like, well, what's helped me through this is the fans, I'm performing and people just giving so much love back to me. And I thought, wow, this guy is so awesome, so that was a big deal. And I happened to meet Miriam Margolyes. I don't know if you would know who she is. She's done a lot, probably a lot of stuff that I don't even know about. She was in a very old
Miriam,
TV.
She British Australian actor?
But she was in a very old TV production of A Little Princess, where she was the somewhat nicer sister of Miss Minchin, who was in charge of the school for girls that treats the main character Sarah so terribly. But then she was Aunt Sponge in James and the Giant Peach, as well as the
Cats and Dogs as well, I think.
What was that?
Cats and Dogs. I recognize her from Cats and Dogs. She was.
I see. I didn't even know she was in Cats and Dogs. She was, she was Fly, the motherly sheepdog, and Babe. She's just done tons and tons of stuff. Super versatile. Fantastic actress, and she was auditioning. Was she auditioning for? I'm trying to think if she was auditioning for the part of the witch, or the character that was like the witch in Rapunzel Unbraided at the time. That was a really crazy version of Rapunzel we were doing, where two kids got pulled out of the real world in San Francisco and were forced to play the parts of Rapunzel and the prince, and the real Rapunzel and the prince were turned into a dog and a squirrel, and like the storytelling god and the wicked witch had a deal, as to whether the story would end happily if you had real people enacting the parts, and there were songs, and the dog and the squirrel sang a love duet and danced like Gene Kelly and whoever else, it was wild. But it was cool because a lot of really amazing actors came in and like did a reading of the script just because we were doing this version of the story. So I got to, be in the same room with a lot of them, even if I didn't talk to a lot of them. Because of that same project, great. Now I can't think of her name, even though she's completely amazing. Galinda, the Good Witch in Wicked. She was also Easter in American Gods. And why can't I think of her name? You know who I'm talking about. That unbelievably famous singer and performer and voice actress. She was going to be the voice of this.
Kristen
Chenoweth.
She was in Pushing Daisies. My parents introduced me to that a while ago.
Yes, she's in Pushing Daisies. That's right. Yeah, one of the better parts of that short-lived series. But because she was in a few scenes that I was working on, I actually got to meet a tiny person, even tinier than she appears on screen. But yeah, super nice, super friendly. Carla Gugino came into the studio once, and she exchanged a few quick pleasantries. I'm not sure why she was there, Probably maybe it was something she was trying out for, or, maybe she just wanted a tour with, because she was, doing something for the live action part of it. Um, uh, John Heater, Napoleon Dynamite, came into the studio. They were talking. Yeah, they were talking about him. I could do a whole John Heater. I'll try to make it fast. So, Napoleon Dynamite comes out, and before I even see the movie, I see pictures of the movie poster, and I get calls from everybody in my family. It's like, dude, this is you in high school. Look, he's got the same hair, the glasses, the moon boots, the reddish brown corduroy suit that you had. He's like, he's completely clueless socially, and he likes to dance like a maniac. He's you, man. And so for Halloween, the movie comes right around Halloween, and I see the movie, and I'm like, holy crap, it is me. And so I shaved my beard off. I had a wig. My brother actually sent me a curly wig. I had a little bit more hair than I do now, but still, so basically it was like my hair was when I was in high school, maybe even a little bit curlier. And for the rest of the day, and he got me a Vote for Pedro T-shirt, and so I just wandered around. I had a fanny pack with tater tots that I was reheating throughout the day to offer to people, like, want a tot, And so I just was Napoleon Dynamite. And here's the funny thing. Some of the people who had seen the movie thought, oh my gosh, it's him, and they actually like played music and got me to do the dance and everything. And they'd say, what are you going to do now? Napoleon's like, whatever I want, dang it, or they had not seen the movie and they had no idea who I was supposed to be. But the great thing is that I would say 80% of the people who saw me had no idea who I was. Like they didn't know it was me, in other words. They just thought it was some strange weirdo wandering around the studio, possibly because I looked so different with hair and no beard, but also I was really committed, doing the voice, the face, puffing my lips out like, oh, what? Oh, my lips hurt real bad, and the funny thing was, like, sometimes it was like weeks later, my coworkers would come back and say, oh my gosh, I saw the movie. You were perfect, and then like some people came back the next day and said, I talked to you for like an hour and I didn't know it was you, Mark. That was crazy. And the terrible thing was, it's either great or terrible. It's like when I came home with my roommates, I couldn't turn it off. Like I felt like I needed to stop talking like him and doing the face and the half-lit face, but I couldn't. Like, it wasn't until I went to sleep that night I could, get out of character. Oh, and I did go to a video store. That was right. I went to a dance where it was like a Halloween themed dance, and I got best costume and best something else. And then we were driving by a Blockbuster video. Remember those?
Oh yeah, we had one here in my city.
Have some of those up your way?
Yeah, we had one like here in my city. We went there one time. I was able to experience it, and I'm very happy.
Oh, dude, I'll tell you, man, I spent a lot of time in Blockbuster, over the years. That was a whole age that I'm sad to see gone now. But I came in my costume. I said, dude, do you guys have Napoleon Dynamite on video? I'm like, no, it hasn't come out. It's like, dang it! And I kicked the door open. Gosh, and then one of the girls runs out and says, you're him, you're Napoleon Dynamite, and I'm like, oh, not really, but he's pretty awesome though. I've got some acting skills, so, but that was pretty exciting for them, anyway. So having John Heater and his twin brother, who looks exactly like him, who wanted to be an animator. That's why they were at the studio, because he wanted to work for Disney, and John Heater was famous at that point, and it turned out we ended up being in the same going to the same church, and same ward together. Him and his brother and me for a couple of years. So I would see them and say hi to them from time to time. But yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to the McAuley Tucker Show, and thank you to our guest for coming on to the show. Part 2 of this episode of the McAuley Tucker Show will be releasing next week. Be sure to keep your eye out for that. Also, be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast. Thank you so much, and you have a good one.